Now, what else do we see with people who test high on annoyance, anger, cynical hostility, and so forth? Well, they have higher levels of cortisol, testosterone, and cholesterol. Each of those have their own contribution to make toward inflammation, arterial inflammation, hardening of the arteries, plaque development, and so forth. But far and away, the most kind of common way we have to connect our psychological state of mind, anger specifically, and cardiovascular disease risk is by measuring your vagal tone, or heart rate variability. Now, I'm not a cardiologist, but the way that I understand it is this. These studies put people on a Holter monitor and tell them to live their lives for 24 hours and come back and they download the data. They determine who's at high risk and who's at low risk of developing disease. And lo and behold, what they find is that those two groups, the high risk, low risk groups, don't differ a lot in terms of their average pulse in 24 hours. They don't even differ a whole lot in terms of the average interval between beats. Where the high and low risk groups differ the most is how much statistical variance there is in the interval between beats in a 24-hour period of time. So hypothetically, two people come in, they both have a pulse of 70. Their average interval between beats is 0.5 seconds. A person who is at low risk of developing disease might have had in 24 hours some interval between beats that's as short as 0.1 seconds and as long as 0.9 seconds. A person who comes in at high risk of disease has low variability. So they also have an average of 0.5, but in a period of a day, they may not have had any intervals shorter than 0.4 or longer than 0.6. Over the last 15 years, the two things most often associated with low heart rate variability, high risk of disease, sedentary lifestyle, and cynical hostility. What else is associated with people who score high on scales of anger and hostility? They behave differently. They smoke more cigarettes than non-hostile people. They drink less alcohol than non-hostile people. They tend to have higher intake of sodium in their diets than people who score low on cynical hostility. So across the board, they're actually behaving in ways that those behaviors further contribute to why cardiovascular disease is the outcome that is most often associated with this anger. But let me be really, really clear. It's not about being angry. It's how long you feel that way. Now, the best experimental evidence I have of this was years ago when I was doing studies of this nature. I was back at Yale, and what's the most reliable way to really tick off a Yale undergraduate? Question their intelligence. Okay? So we did that by giving them an anagram, a word scramble. We said, here's 7 letters, figure out what 7-letter word they make, and we'll give you $5. Okay. In fact, here's 10 of them. We'll give you 10 minutes to make as much money as you possibly can. All right. Now, we mentioned almost in passing that I wouldn't even worry about it because the guy before you, he did all 10 of them in like less than 3 minutes. No, that's more than a little white lie. That's definitely not true. We spent hours making sure those 7 letters, they don't make any 7-letter word, right? So here he is. He has an impossible task, but led to believe it's easy as pie. And the guy before him made loads of cash, right? Or another way we have to annoy people, and you can tell by the smile on my face, I really enjoyed this time of annoying people, for the sake of science, of course, is that, remember that game we played as kids called Operation? You know, you pull out the bones with the tweezers, try not to hit the sides. This is actually just the opposite. We have a 1/8 inch strip of metal in the shape of a 5-point star on a plexiglass tabletop. And your task, each subject is given a metal pin that's connected to the computer. And you have to maintain the tracing of this star with your pin and don't break contact. If you break contact, you fall off the little strip of metal, you have to start all over again. but each time you make it successfully around, you make more money. Well, that's a little too easy. So instead of being able to directly see what they're doing, they put their hand through a screen and do this task, and only can see what they're doing by way of a mirror, which reverses the proprioceptive feedback. Up is down, left is right. It's not nearly as easy. But the benevolent researchers we are, we want everybody to make as much money as possible. So what do? We provide for the entire 30 minutes of this task a supportive coach who constantly whispers in their ear supportive statements such as, are you sure you know your right from your left? The guy in here before you left with 35 bucks, you owe us 10? I'd get going, right? We do all of this because we want everyone's testosterone, cortisol, blood pressure, heart rate to go through the ceiling. Why? Because that's not news. The main effect of stress, so what? We're looking at person-environment interaction. That's where your money is. So what we had done before all of these annoying tasks, we had given them a hostility questionnaire. Lo and behold, the people scoring low on anger, when you annoy them in all these ways, they spike in all these measures, but they're recovering across the board pretty much within about 9 or 10 minutes. Whereas those people who are scoring high on cynical hostility don't spike any higher than the rest, but they're taking 20, 25, 35 minutes or more to get back to baseline. It's the area under the curve of recovery that drives the clinical condition. I mean, take yourself as an example. Come on, just yesterday, you had, I'm sure, at least 5 opportunities to become annoyed, right? The question is, how long did you feel that way? A very common experience all of us have had, I know, is only when you're in a hurry. You go to the market, you get your 4 or 5 items, and you stand in the express lane, and it's then you realize how many people cannot count to 12, right? That's frustrating is not going to impact your health, but the question you got to ask yourself, are you putting the groceries in the back of your car, still muttering under your breath about the demise of Western civilization? You know, nobody ever follows the rules, right? The body follows where the mind takes it. Why else would relaxation work, right? But it's working in the opposite way, because if I keep ruminating about those annoying things, my body is still activated. That's where the kind of impact on your health really is. Now, quite frankly, the bumper sticker that, I don't know if you've seen it in this area or not, certainly back at home I see it a lot, and this bumper, the bumper sticker really speaks the truth. Mean people suck, right? We don't want to be around them, and guess what? Science actually has confirmed there's a correlation between the elevated scores on anger and how few friends you have, right? Well, the idea is that over time, that kind of loss of friends is going to result in loneliness, much more than people who are not cynically hostile. UCLA, and I think it's because of the sophisticated equipment that's necessary to do this research, but all 3 studies showing the following were done at UCLA. And what they did, they bring people in and they stress them out. But they had given them a loneliness scale. People who scored low on loneliness, not an issue for them, their blood pressure goes up, and it's a result, they find out, because of increased transient cardiac output, volume, okay, of blood. What we typically think of increase in blood pressure. But that wasn't true for people who score high on loneliness. Their blood pressure goes up the same amount, but it's not from increased cardiac output. It's actually more the result they see from increased peripheral vascular resistance, a narrowing of your arterial network out in the periphery, which cardiologists will tell you is much more predictive of cardiovascular disease than a transient increased blood volume output that most of us think when stress comes back.